iOS 15 will be launched at WWDC, which is happening on the 7th of June. So what's coming in iOS 15 for iPhone users?
It's okay, we're used to the monthly iOS 14 updates, and now we're about to start seeing all the speculation about iOS 15. So what do people have to have in mind? What are the really big updates to expect in the fall?
Well, iOS 14 was a really, really big update for people who are interested in privacy or who care about privacy, which is obviously a massive deal to all iPhone users now. Apple has been using this as a USP for about 2 years now. So iOS 13 was the first one that introduced some privacy settings to iPhone users. So you're able to kind of better control how you attract across your iPhone, and the data that was being collected was more transparent. iOS 14 really concentrated on making this even more transparent. We had the privacy labels, which launched last year, so we can see whichever app is collecting data about us and what kind of data before we use them. Then this year, we had kind of what we'd say the headline feature was, which ties very nicely in with the privacy labels. We had iOS 14.5, which came with app tracking transparency. Few hiccups at launch, but does seem to be working fairly well now. So iOS 15, we don't have a lot of information at the moment. Apple does keep these things fairly quiet, but Bloomberg's run a story, which appeared about a week ago, saying that iOS 15 is going to include a new menu. So this new menu will be very, very transparent about which apps are tracking you, and it says secretly in the story. So we can draw our own conclusions from what it means from that, but it looks like it will build on the app tracking transparency combined with the privacy labels.
I think the use of the word secretly is really interesting, because I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding across kind of the Apple user base that because app tracking transparency turned up and because the privacy labels had turned up, suddenly everything was okay. And I think certainly what we've tried to do on SDC is expose some of the invisible / secret tracking that's still taking place, and not to forget that these apps are still taking your data. And the fact that they may not be tracking you on other people's apps or across other people's websites doesn't stop them using all of the data that you give to them. And clearly, if Facebook or Google or somebody else knows who you are, they know who you are. They can track you wherever you pop up on one of their platforms, because they already have your identity and a lot of your information. I think if Apple, we've always said, haven't we, that we hope that Apple is just going to continue this drive towards making privacy far more front of mind. So really welcome, a new move this year.
And it's really that transparency factor, isn't it? And we've said before as a group on STC that we want to see more transparency. Yes, we are starting to see it, especially on iPhones. Google is apparently having its own features for Android phones that are coming out sooner, next year possibly as well. So that's great, but more transparency. So how exactly are we being tracked? When we give our permissions, what does that mean? And then what data is being collected separately? Because data collection and tracking are not the same thing, are they? And I think a lot of users get confused and think, oh, I'm not being tracked. False sense of security. I can just relax now. I've said no to tracking. Nothing else matters.
And I think what people need to understand is that despite the crackdown on cross-site tracking and all the rest of it, there are dozens of trackers out there, and ultimately the two big companies that benefit from this tracking the most are Google and Facebook, and they are different. Facebook is unapologetically a data-driven advertising giant, and Google has its fingers in multiple pies, albeit makes most of its money from advertising. The Android point is really interesting because you can kind of see Google reluctantly tiptoeing through this minefield that Apple has set after Facebook raced across it and blew itself up in the press earlier in the year. What happens next is interesting. Apple, more so than ever before, despite all the what happens on the iPhone stays on the iPhone behind, despite all that chat, you really get a sense now that we are at this pivotal point for privacy. As users, you have no excuse anymore. The data's there, you need to use it. You can look it up, you need to change your settings. It's so obvious how to stay private right now. And some of the data that we've started to see around the reduction in value of iPhone or iOS users to advertisers, the shift over to Android is much more of a focus because the data's still there. I mean, this is probably, the biggest driver, I would guess, from a privacy perspective, from people to shift from Android to iOS that we've seen yet, when all of this stuff actually starts to become real.
I'd like to see more transparency in terms of the apps that are actually collecting our data. I know we've got the privacy labels at the moment, but I don't think they're kind of front and center as they should be. And I think Apple should be more prominent about its own data collection as well, because, you know, it's criticizing everyone else. It's putting this all out there. It's saying this is how other apps collect your data. This is how they're tracking you. But it's not really doing that with its own apps. It says, yes, we do have our own privacy labels, but yet this isn't something that's very obvious to me as an iPhone user. And I really think that that's quite important and does need to change.